Breaking news, people, stop whatever you're doing because this one is about to shake the internet straight out of its socks. Imagine being so messy that you got kicked out of a rap crew, not for bad rapping, not for missing shows, not even for owing money, but allegedly for punching somebody over a fart. And yes, you heard that right, but hold up, it gets even juicier because Jim Jones is now coming forward, years later, with a whole different version of events, and if what he's saying is true, then Camron might have been capping this entire time now. Ask yourself this: why is a legendary comedian like Cat Williams rolling around in a bulletproof Sprinter with actual bullet holes in it just because he cracked some jokes too close to the Dipset camp? Why are Dipset members whispering behind the scenes about setting him up? And most importantly, why is Jim Jones suddenly so bold that he's calling out his own brother Camron with a $10 million boxing challenge? Something about this whole story smells funny, and it ain't just that mystery fart, so buckle up because what I'm about to break down for you will make you question everything you thought you knew about Dipset, Cat Williams, and the dirty little secrets hiding in Harlem's most iconic crew. Alright, picture this: the mid-2000s hip-hop world is on fire, and Harlem is moving like it owns the culture. Dipset is the hottest crew out. Camron is the general rocking pink furs like armor. Jim Jones is the capo holding down the streets. Juelz Santana is the young gun with potential oozing from every bar, and suddenly out of nowhere, Cat Williams, a comedian with a sharp tongue, a flashy wardrobe, and the audacity of 10 rappers, decides he belongs in the mix now. Most comedians stick to the stage and the spotlight, but Cat was never most comedians. He was moving like a rock star, popping up in Dipset videos, lending his voice to tracks, and even spreading his money around like confetti at a Harlem parade one night in Philly. At an event in 2006, Cat did the unthinkable. He reached into his bag of riches and dropped $30,000 in Camron's hands, then for good measure tossed around luxury gifts like Oprah giving away cars. People watched in disbelief as he blessed Beanie and Lil Mo with whips just to show he could, and for a moment it seemed like Cat had secured his spot in Harlem royalty. But that kind of shine comes with shadows, and jealousy began brewing right under the surface because Dipset had built its reputation on street credibility, on Harlem authenticity, on paying dues in the trenches, and here comes a comedian outspending, outshining, and maybe even out-hustling the rappers themselves. Imagine putting your life on the line for years, only to be upstaged by a 5'5" comedian in a silk suit. It did not sit right with everyone, and cracks began to show behind the scenes. And then came the infamous story that has lived in hip-hop lore for nearly 2 decades, the fart incident. According to the tipping point came backstage at an event when Cat got into it with a Dipset member over something so petty it sounded like a stand-up routine. Cam claimed Cat believed the man had farted near him and took it as some kind of disrespect. Instead of laughing it off, Cat allegedly swung connected and sparked a mini riot. Cam stepped in, according to his own telling, flipped Cat upside down, slammed him on the floor, and almost went further before snapping out of it like some kind of out-of-body experience. The way Cam tells it, you would think he was auditioning for a WWE contract, picking Cat up like a ragdoll and planting him on the ground. But when Cat later told his side of the story, he laughed off that version and called it pure fiction. He made it clear Cam never manhandled him, never slammed him, never made him see stars. So whose version is the truth, and why do the details keep changing? Jim Jones recently poured gasoline on this fire by saying it was never about gas in the air or fists to the face. The real issue was power and jealousy. Cat was moving too flashy, moving too heavy, and certain people in the camp felt threatened. Insiders whispered that some Dipset members were even plotting against Cat, that it reached the point where the comedian had to ride around in a bulletproof Sprinter with satellite dishes on top and bullet holes already carved into the steel as a warning to anyone watching. J.R. Ryder himself claimed Cat once pulled up to see him in Washington Heights in that exact bulletproof ride, moving paranoid, moving careful, moving like someone who knew enemies were circling. And that is when you realize this was never just a silly beef over bathroom humor. This was deeper. This was money, respect, and reputation colliding head-on, because Cat was not just a guest, he was playing the game like he owned part of the board. And in Harlem, that kind of flex does not go unanswered. Dipset started treating Cat like an outsider, whispering behind his back, questioning his loyalty, painting him as someone stirring the pot for no reason even. Cam said Cat was gassing up drama, claiming Dipset was badmouthing him when they were not, but maybe that was projection. Maybe Dipset could not stomach the idea of a comedian having the streets buzzing louder than they were. And while Cat was pulling up in armored vehicles, Dipset was struggling to keep their empire from cracking within itself. Because remember, this was the same period when rumors were already flying about internal beef. Cam was clashing with Jim, Jim was clashing with Cam, and Juelz was caught in the middle by 2007. Cam admitted he and Jim were not even speaking, and though he downplayed it as nothing serious, Jim saw it differently. He felt abandoned, he felt Cam dipped out on him, and Jewels leaving them to fend for themselves musically while Cam hid in the background and pushed narratives that made him look like the bigger man. The truth is, the Dipset brand was already wobbling before Kat ever showed up. Kat just added fuel to a fire that was already smoking, and when the smoke started filling the room, nobody wanted to admit they were choking because image was everything. Harlem was everything, and Dipset's Harlem credentials were the crown jewel. So when Cat Williams rolled in with big money, bigger talk, and bulletproof toys, Dipset had a choice: embrace the chaos and let him be part of the family, or cut him off before his shine overshadowed theirs. History tells us they chose the latter, and the way the story has been retold, twisted, and exaggerated proves one thing: the truth was never simple, the truth was never fart jokes and slapstick, the truth was deeper, uglier, and wrapped in Harlem politics of ego, jealousy, and survival. So now that the smoke was building, and the tension between Camron, Jim Jones, and Cat Williams was no longer a rumor but a headline in every barbershop conversation across Harlem, the story took on a life of its own, because once Cam planted that version about slamming Kat upside down, people repeated it like gospel, but the streets loved to exaggerate, and suddenly it became less about what really happened and more about what version made the best story. But while fans debated, Kat was already distancing himself, pulling out of Dipset circles, and moving with a different kind of energy, because according to people close to him, he felt Dipset had turned from allies into enemies, and not just jealous enemies but dangerous ones. The whispers claimed Cat believed some members had plotted to line him up, and that paranoia explained why he rolled in that bulletproof Sprinter, which was not just a random rental but an armored fortress that looked like something out of a military convoy. J.R. Ryder swore he saw it with his own eyes, caught pulling up with bullet holes in the door, moving like a man who knew someone had taken a shot at him, and if that is true, then it proves Cat was not just imagining drama, he was living inside a war disguised as friendship. And while Cat was figuring out how to survive, Dipset was figuring out how to spin the story. Cam leaned into his version, portraying Kat as the unstable outsider who could not handle jokes, and Jim stayed quiet until now, because Jim's silence for years made it seem like he was co-signing Cam's narrative. But when he finally broke that silence, he dropped bombs that changed the whole perspective. Jim said flat out that the falling out was never about one silly fight, it was about jealousy, envy, and power struggles that were already corroding the foundation of Dipset. He pointed the finger back at Cam, suggesting that Cam's ego could not handle someone else, especially a comedian, stealing the spotlight. And once Jim said it out loud, it all made sense, because Cam has a long history of rewriting stories to make himself the hero. Remember when Jim and Jewels stood on stage with 50 Cent during Cam's beef with him? That move created cracks so wide they could not be covered with a pink fur coat, and that was before Cat was even a factor. So by the time Cat got involved, the crew was already divided. Cam wanted control, Jim wanted recognition, Jewels wanted freedom, and Cat just wanted to move like a boss. And when all those agendas clashed, the result was inevitable. The family portrait was broken beyond repair, and the fallout is still echoing today. What makes it more dramatic is how public perception was manipulated. Fans laughed at Cam's version because it sounded funnier, but funnier does not mean truer, and Cat himself made it clear Cam was fabricating details, yet people kept repeating it because the myth was more entertaining than the reality, and in hip-hop, myths often become history. But what about the people around them? Insiders claimed Cat's generosity was rubbing Dipset members the wrong way. Some said he was handing out too much money, too many gifts, and making them look like they could not match his level. One anonymous source allegedly said Cat was out there making Dipset look broke in front of the industry by giving out cars and cash like candy, and when you humiliate proud Harlem hustlers by making them look small, that is a recipe for war. Another claimed Cat bragged about how much he was contributing compared to what he was getting back, and that arrogance stung the egos of men who had built their brand on never bowing to anyone. And once that ego is bruised, there is no bandage big enough to heal it. Jim Jones in his more recent interviews has indirectly confirmed that Cat's money moves were causing discomfort, though he stopped short of saying names, but the message is clear. Cat was too big, too loud, too flashy for Dipset's fragile ecosystem, and they responded the only way they knew how, by painting him as the villain, and then isolating him until he left on his own, and that was the end of Cat Williams, the Dipset affiliate. But it was only the beginning of the bigger story, because years later, the cracks in Dipset itself became impossible to hide. Cam and Jim were beefing publicly, Jewels was battling his own struggles, freaky Zeke was defending loyalties on camera, and fans were left wondering if the diplomats were ever truly a family or just a brand stitched together by temporary convenience. The Katt Williams saga now looks less like a comedy skit and more like the first sign of a dynasty breaking apart, because if they could not even protect an ally who brought money and attention, what hope did they have of protecting each other? Jim's comments now exposed Cam as a man who rewrites history to keep his image clean, and Cam's shots at Jim about being from the Bronx rather than Harlem prove how low the pettiness could go in Harlem. Credibility is no small matter. If you are not certified by Harlem, then you are nothing in the diplomat's world. Cam tried to use that as a weapon against Jim, but Freaky Zeke stepped in with receipts saying Jim moved to Harlem as a child and grew up in the culture long before Dipset was even formed, so the narrative of Jim being an outsider crumbles under real evidence, and that leaves Cam looking like the one gaslighting the entire movement, because if he would lie about Jim being from Harlem, why would he not lie about flipping Katt Williams upside down and slamming him like a wrestler? The pattern is obvious. Cam has always tried to control the story, even when it means stretching the truth, until it snaps and fans are starting to notice. Jim Jones challenging Cam to a $10 million boxing match is not just about fists, it is about calling out years of manipulation and saying enough is enough, because Jim is tired of being painted as the fanboy, the outsider, the capo who needed Cam's permission to breathe. Now he is putting his money and his fists where his mouth is, daring Cam to prove all those stories in the ring in front of the world. So now here we are in the present day, with all the years of tension layered on top of each other, and the ghosts of Dipset's past still haunting the crew like shadows that never quite fade, and it is Jim Jones who finally decides he has had enough and goes public, not with subliminal bars or slick disses, but with a flat-out challenge that shocks everyone watching. He says if Camron really wants to keep running his mouth, they can settle it in a boxing ring for $10 million cash. No talking, no interviews, just gloves and fists, and the world watching. And the very fact that Jim put that number on the table shows how deep the wounds really run, because 10 million is not pocket change. That is the kind of number you throw down when you want to prove a point that cannot be ignored, and the audience ate it up instantly, because hip-hop fans love spectacle, and they love drama, and nothing would sell faster than to Harlem legends who once called each other brothers, now trying to knock each other's heads off in the ring. But when you look closer, the challenge is more symbolic than financial. It is Jim telling the world he is tired of Cam's narratives, tired of being painted as the tag-along, tired of the stories about how he was just a fan begging for a spot on the couch, and tired of hearing how Katt Williams got slammed like a cartoon character, when the truth was never that simple. Because if Cam was willing to exaggerate a story about a fart and a fistfight, what other parts of Dipset history has he rewritten to keep himself looking like the hero? And once you start asking that question, you realize maybe the whole Dipset story is not what we thought. Maybe the image of Harlem unity, the flashy cars, the iconic outfits, the larger-than-life persona was always built on shaky ground, with more lies than truth and more ego than loyalty. And that is exactly why Katt Williams' brief time with them matters so much, because his story is like a mirror, reflecting the insecurities of a crew that could never share the spotlight without turning on each other. Katt rolled in flashing money, and instead of welcoming him, they saw competition. Instead of seeing an ally, they saw a rival, and instead of celebrating his success, they whispered behind his back and plotted his downfall. And if that is how they treated someone, giving them money and gifts, imagine how they treated each other once the stakes got higher. Jim's words now put the spotlight squarely on Cam, who has made a career out of being cool, calm, and dismissive, as if every feud was beneath him. But this time, the dismissive act is not working, because people are connecting the dots. Katt denies Katt's version, Jim calls it jealousy. Freaky Zeke debunks the Harlem slander, and suddenly, Cam's credibility is looking shaky. Fans on social media are already rewriting their own narratives. Some are calling Cam the master manipulator, others are calling Jim bitter and clout-chasing, and a few are saying Katt Williams might have been the only one brave enough to call it how it really was. The split opinions just fuel the fire, because controversy sells, and Dipset has always known how to sell controversy, but this time it feels different, because the beef is no longer just about music or egos, it is about the truth itself. Who owns it, who controls it, and who gets exposed for twisting it? Jim, on The Breakfast Club, was visibly angry when Charlemagne repeated the claim that Cam made about him sending people to jail. Jim shut it down instantly, saying that whoever believed that nonsense had to be smoking new drugs, and you could hear in his voice that this was not just another rumor to laugh off, this was a direct attack on his integrity, and in Harlem your reputation is your life. So when Cam tries to paint him as someone disloyal, as someone who sends people to jail, as someone who was never really Harlem in the first place, Yem is forced to respond with the nuclear option, a $10 million fight, because, in his eyes, nothing less will erase the lies and show who is really standing tall. And while all this drama plays out in interviews, podcasts, and social media, the fans are left with one burning question: who is telling the truth? Because if you believe Cat Williams, Cam has been capping for years. If you believe Jim Jones, the Dipset story is built on jealousy and betrayal. If you believe Cam, everyone else is bitter and rewriting history to make themselves look better. The beauty of this mess is that nobody can ever fully prove their side, because hip-hop history is written in rumors, hearsay, and personal bias. What you choose to believe often depends on who you already liked more before the drama even started, and that is why this scandal keeps growing bigger, because every fan picks a side and then argues about it as if they were in the room when it all went down. The internet is flooded with debates, memes, and fake posters for a Jim versus Cam fight. Promoters are allegedly sniffing around to see if they can make it real. Cat Williams, meanwhile, is enjoying the chaos from the sidelines, occasionally dropping his own cryptic comments in interviews, reminding everyone that he is still very much alive, very much bulletproof, and very much not afraid to call Harlem legends liars. And that in itself is enough to keep the fire burning, because if there is one thing Cat has always known how to do, it is to turn pain into comedy, and comedy into power. And in this case, his short-lived Dipset chapter has turned into one of the wildest hip-hop stories of the decade. One that exposes how fragile loyalty really is when fame and money are on the line. So as it stands, we have Cam, the self-proclaimed general, scrambling to hold his image together, Jim the Capo, finally breaking free from silence and calling out the lies. Cat, the outsider-turned-whistleblower whose paranoia might have been justified all along, and fans who are sitting back with popcorn hoping the next chapter is even crazier than the last. And the truth is, it probably will be, because Harlem stories never die, they just get remixed, retold, and exaggerated until they become legends. Whether or not the boxing match ever happens, the fact that Jim was willing to put that challenge out there proves Dipset's wounds will never fully heal. And whether Cam admits it or not, Cat Williams has become the unlikely spark that exposed everything fans thought was hidden, because what started as a joke about a fart ended up exposing the cracks in one of the most iconic crews in hip-hop history. And the irony is almost poetic. A comedian walks into Harlem's toughest rap collective, and years later, he is the one who pulls the mask off their legacy, showing the world that behind the music, behind the style, and behind the fame were fragile egos, constant jealousy, and an endless battle to control the story. And now that story is out in the open, where everyone can see it and debate it, and no amount of pink fur can cover it up anymore. And now, after hearing all this madness, after watching the puzzle pieces fall into place, and after realizing that what we thought was hip-hop history might just be hip-hop mythology, the real question is, what do you believe? Because maybe Cam is capping, maybe Jim is bitter, maybe Cat Williams is the only one with the courage to say it how it is, or maybe they are all spinning their own tales to protect their egos. The truth is, the truth might never come out, and that is exactly why you need to stay tuned, because scandals like this are not just about the past, they are about the future of how we remember these icons. So here is what I want you to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Whose side are you on? Do you think Cat was unfairly pushed out? Do you think Jim is finally standing up for himself? Or do you think Cam is still running the Harlem narrative like a master manipulator? And while you are at it, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications, because you already know the story is not over, and the next chapter is going to be even wilder. You do not want to miss it.